last Tuesday we got a tip. If people engage in child pornography, there's unique characteristics that are identifiable to law enforcement agencies and other agencies. We received a tip that somebody was accessing mobile devices at 102 Hadaway that contain child pornography. When these investigations occur, we typically bring whatever evidence we have, and we obtain a search warrant, which was executed last Tuesday at this location. We arrived at that search warrant. We seized 4 cell phones and 2 computers from the location. Gary Gutenberger was the only person there. He was a male, 68 years old, I believe, and again, had no contact with him for the past week or so. A day or so after obtaining the evidence, we were able to forensically examine both the cell phones and the computers. That's a process that's still ongoing now, but just with a short examination, we discovered over 100 sexually explicit videos involving children from 3 to 9 years old, including sexual activity, sexual battery, bondage, the most horrific examples of child pornography that somebody can have. In addition to that, there were more than 200 still photographs containing the same type of material on the phones. And again, this is a process that we are still forensically examining those 4 cell phones and those 2 computers, but that was enough evidence for us to move forward and obtain an arrest warrant for Gary Gutenberger at this location. Since we knew that he lived here, we were conducting surveillance in the area. The easiest way for us to apprehend somebody is to hopefully do it, which presents the least amount of distraction and harm to anyone else. So as we were conducting surveillance, Gary Gutenberger came out of his house. He was on a walker. He walked down to the middle of the driveway. Our detectives, investigators that were here conducting surveillance looked at that as a great opportunity to try to apprehend him without incident. And he immediately reached to his waistband, pulling a .38 revolver out of his waistband and start raising it up. The deputy that was on scene, the detective that was on scene, provided clear communication. Don't do that, drop your firearm. His response to the deputy that was here was, "I have to." Shortly after that, our deputy, we fired at least 2 shots. We believe it was 2 shots, taking down the suspect, and he is deceased in the driveway right now. I've had the opportunity to watch a video video that we had put up conducting surveillance within the area. Look, we're here, we're watching. We have video that is documenting these things. And you talk about a clear shot. There's nothing clearer than this. Gary Gutenberger was presenting a real and imminent threat to the deputies that were here on scene. They used great patience and discretion. They tried to talk him out of actually doing this. And of course, I'm convinced that his mind was made up should he be confronted with this thing that occurred last week. If there's one person that absolutely knew what was on those devices that were seized, it was him. In addition to the evidence that we're still collecting, we know at least on one occasion where he communicated with another woman about engaging in sexual activity with her child. And at this point, we don't believe that that has ever occurred. But those were ongoing communications he has. He clearly was taking this to the next level, and he posed an imminent and credible threat, not only to our deputies, but to this community. As we typically do, we have asked our partners with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to come out here and conduct an independent investigation into all of the circumstances that had occurred on this particular incident, as asking our 18th Judicial Circuit State Attorney to come out and provide an independent eye into everything that they see out here on the scene. Our investigators and detectives are here. They're canvassing the area. They're talking to neighbors. They're trying to find out as much information as they possibly can. That's an ongoing process. That's a process that's not wrapped up in one day, because there's a lot of questions that people have of how can this happen in a incredibly safe community, living next to somebody who's engaging in this type of behavior. We don't know that he's been involved in any criminal activity in the past. We knew at one time he was a firefighter. He had been retired for the fire department for more than 12 years. There is absolutely no correlation between the fire department and what he was doing here. Again, long since retired from the fire department, but he had a career one time as a firefighter. We are providing our victim advocates that are here, not only to neighbors or people who may be in the area that want to talk to somebody for grief counseling. As we typically do, the deputies that we have that are involved in these cases, we want to make sure that we can lift them up and support them and their families, and that's a process that's going on right now. So if you look at a cut and dry case, to recap, we got information at 102 Hadaway Court in Longwood that the person at that location was using unique characteristics, their email, other characteristics to access child porn. That porn was kids between the age of 3 and 9, and it included bondage, sexual batteries, and the most horrific examples of abuse and neglect that any human being could ever imagine. We seized on a search warrant last Tuesday 4 cell phones and 2 computers. That was examined as we examined it in our lab because he would not give us any of the passcodes. He would not work with us during the investigation. Heck, he didn't even want to come to the door, which is part of the reason why we were conducting surveillance here. In just one day, we were able to recover more than 100 videos, some of them as long as 22 minutes long, with kids tied up with rope and everything else. In addition to that, hundreds of still videos and him communicating with at least one other adult about taking his perversion one step further and arranging to meet up with a child. To this point, we don't know of any children that have been victimized by him. There was no physical evidence that we have recovered so far to show that he actually acted out on this. And he walks out as we're conducting surveillance with his walker. When he walks outside, he's got a pair of shorts on, shirt. He's got a .38 revolver fully loaded in his waistband. He reaches for the revolver, pulls it out. The deputy says, "Don't do it, don't do it." He says, "I have to," which leads into the ideology of suicide by cop and all of these things that I'm sure somebody would want to ask me about anyway. Our deputies that are involved in this are doing fine physically. And from my conversations with them, they seem to be doing well considering the circumstances emotionally. And FDLE is conducting the independent investigation as we wrap this case up. We'll be here for a while, knocking on doors and ensuring the community that this particular incident was isolated to 102 Hadaway Court. There's no threat that we're aware of kids that live in this neighborhood. There's been no prior reports of criminal activity involving him or anyone else, so that's what we know at this time. With that, I'll open for any questions you may have.
Kids in this neighborhood, Sheriff, but what about anywhere in Central Florida, and what kind of word are you putting out about that as far as the victims are concerned?
Yeah, I think that when people watch this story back, they'll automatically cross their Rolodex to say, have I ever come in contact with this guy in any other spaces, right? Was he involved in the church? Was he involved in other organizations? And I think that that's something that we want to ask the public to look at. And if they have encounters that they have with him that now, in retrospect, seem to be suspicious or areas of concern, we encourage them to step forward and do that. But as of now, we have not had anybody step forward and make any independent reports. This investigation was almost exclusively used based upon the digital evidence we were able to obtain and conducting a proactive investigation here. But again, as people watch this back, if there are reports, we encourage them to contact the Seminole County Sheriff's Office so we can follow up on those leads.
The video of the shooting is from the surveillance they were conducting as they went to arrest the suspect.
Yes, at least we have one. You know, typically when we set up, if we're going to do a surveillance, a visual surveillance, we're going to have some documentation of what we're looking at. And I'm not going to get into any further details of that, but the evidence that I was able to view, to tell you that this was a crystal clear incident involving one of our members, and the defendant, who now is deceased, was a camera that we used to set up to conduct surveillance here.
They were getting ready to go in and serve the arrest warrant. Is that correct?
No, we were not going to go in. So in lieu of going in, the better strategy is to wait until he comes out. Now, we could have gone in. We had an arrest warrant. We could have done that. But I think that the more strategic and smarter and safer strategy is let's just sit him out. We know that there's no other innocent people that are in there that potentially could be in harm's way. And we know inevitably he's going to come out of the house. And that's exactly what happened here. And it was a great opportunity for us to have him out of the house. And what we knew about him from the search warrant is he had many guns around the house. He had several guns when we were here last time actually connected to his walker. And from talking to people that actually knew him, they knew that he was very heavily armed within the area. So you can imagine from a tactical and strategic standpoint, getting him away from potentially things that can cause the good guys harm is a better plan. So we were just going to wait that out. But when he came out here, was a great opportunity for us to step in.
Sheriff, was it constant surveillance?
Yeah, he lives alone.
Which fire department did he work for in California?
He worked for Seminole County Fire Rescue. And again, some of the people that have been within that organization for more than 12 years had the opportunity to work with him. But I emphasize and underscore there's no connection other than that's where he worked 12 years ago. His life apparently seems to shift from that public service mentality from when he was there. But I would imagine that the members of the fire department and the fire chief are incredibly concerned about this, as any person watching this back.
And
Were
what
there
time did
any
the shooting
other-
happen?
What's that?
What time did the shooting happen?
So the shooting happened just before 3:30 this afternoon. And again, we were here, so we initiated the call. It was just before 3:30 this afternoon.
Were there any other positions that he held as far as authority is concerned besides working for the Seminole County Fire Department that may have?
Yeah, Gail, I don't know what he did. I knew that he worked for the fire department. I don't know what role he had within the fire department or if he had any other role in leadership within his community or anything else. Actually, we're just, quite frankly, other than the last week, we really didn't know much about the guy until we got the evidence that came in. We executed the search warrant and we went forward.
Sheriff, is this the suspect? Is this Rick spelling on his name?
I don't know if that does not look like the photograph that I've seen. We'll release a photo when the time comes.
Sheriff, how many times were you out here in the past week to do surveillance? Was it constant surveillance?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I think that what we typically do is we'll want to get some type of idea of what the activity is. And, you know, I don't want to kind of disclose all of the tactics that go along with that, other than to say we have a pretty good and reliable system in place where we want to make sure that we're doing all that we can, because it's not just the individual that we're looking for, or as we typically call the bad guy in cases like this, not even this, but we have a responsibility to protect the neighbors, to ensure and preserve the quality of life. So if we can do something like this, obviously this is a bit of a display here, but we try to minimize that as much as possible. We're thinking that we can come here, that the defendant is not going to stick a gun at us as we're trying to apprehend them. And I think this is kind of the scenario that plays out when that does not occur.
And so
Do you
say
think
it
he
seems
acted
as though he
alone?
felt the walls were closing in?
I don't know what he was thinking, because if he's doing that stuff online, I couldn't even relate to what the hell's going on in his head. But I can only think that he knew it was inevitable what was going to happen here when they seize 4 of your cell phones and 2 of your computers, and you absolutely know what's on it and what you've been doing, and you have some involvement in a public safety background. I think you can see the writing on the wall. And I think probably for the last week or so, he probably was thinking through, when they come back, what am I going to do? And I think we know the answer to that question
Do
now.
you think he acted alone?
One last question before we go, but I'd like you maybe to clarify a little bit more for them the difference between downloading, sharing, and producing, and what his charges actually were.
Yeah. Well, you can look. So I think that he is downloading and sharing information. And again, I'll talk to the detectives, but when he is not only accessing and viewing items of pornography, he's engaging in exchanging pornography with other people. So he's taking videos, he's sharing videos with other people, it's coming back, he's saving these videos, and he is a part of a group that actually logs in with credentials and email addresses that deals with the sharing of child pornography, bondage, all of these most horrific things that you can imagine. He's doing it, and that's what the case is, and that's why he'll be charged with downloading and then sharing the
Which is
information.
why I'm wondering if he worked alone, and what about those other people that he's sharing with? Is it possible that they could face charges as well?
Yeah, I think that there's a big connection of sick people that are out there. That I mean, he's talking to a woman about, having sex with her daughter. And I think that when we see this play out time and time again, I don't care what jurisdiction you are, you can go anywhere in the country. When you cast the net, we have all covered these news conferences where we said we've wrapped up 15 to 50 travelers in a week. And there's people that are out there that are engaged in this. I'm just grateful that we have at least some means to apprehend and take action on these things.
Has that woman been apprehended, and is she also local?
She's not apprehended yet, but I can tell you, I was just talking to our undersheriff and other folks on our team. As this investigation evolves.
All right, so we have been listening to the Seminole County Sheriff about a deputy-involved shooting that happened right before 3:30 today. 68-year-old Gary Guckenberg shot and killed by a deputy. This all stemming from a child pornography investigation. They got a tip last week. They went and checked it out, took 4 cell phones, and 2 computers, and they just got hundreds and hundreds of examples of child pornography of kids ages 3 to 9.
And Sheriff Lima giving us more details there that this was some type of network where people were logging in with email addresses and passwords, all a part of a child porn sharing network. He says they are still digging into who else was involved with that to make those arrests. Again, we have learned that this person that was involved with this allegedly is a retired Seminole County firefighter. We have 2 crews that are at that scene right now. We'll give you much more coming up right here on West 2. Right back here with more headlines after the break.